Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit, the podcast that takes, those really dense academic papers and makes them surprisingly interesting. I'm Pavlov.
And I'm Nikita.
We've noticed a lot of you are tuning in, which is amazing, but I haven't quite hit that subscribe button yet.
Yeah, and that little button, honestly, it's so small, but it makes such a huge difference in helping us reach more people with these important discussions.
Right. It's true. Like the algorithms, those mysterious forces that decide what we all see and hear, they pay a lot of attention to subscriber numbers.
Yeah, think of it like the subscribing. It's like casting a vote for quality content, So these insightful research discussions don't just get lost in the sea of all the information out there.
More subscribers equals more visibility. Right. And that means more resources for us to make even deeper dives for you.
Yeah.
Maybe bring in experts for interviews, even do some live Q&A sessions where you can jump in.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about building a community around research,
Yeah.
where curiosity thrives and knowledge is like shared and debated.
And today, we're diving deep as always into some interesting material.
Oh, yeah.
This time we're going to be looking at an editorial from the Journal of the Academy of Marketing Science.
Interesting.
I know, right? You're
Yeah.
probably thinking, an editorial from the Journal of the Academy of Marketing Science.
Yeah. Not exactly light reading.
No, it's not. But you know what? It's actually surprisingly interesting.
Oh, really?
Yeah, this one is, and the title of this editorial is Reviewers as Developmental Coaches.
I like that.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Like it kind of reframes the whole concept of peer review in academia.
Yeah.
And this one really caught our eye because of, the way it kind of shifts the way we think about reviewers and the whole process of getting your research out there.
Yeah, for sure. Because traditionally, you kind of think of those reviewers as being these gatekeepers.
Right.
Right. They're there to decide what gets published and what doesn't.
Yeah. And this is saying like, well, maybe that's not really the best way to think about it. Maybe there's a more like, supportive role that they can play. And I love this to kind of illustrate their point. The authors use this really cool analogy from the TV show Songland.
Oh, interesting. I love that.
Yeah, it's a great show. And so for those who haven't seen it, Songland, it basically features like these aspiring songwriters.
Yeah.
And they get to pitch their original songs like to a really big like recording artist.
Wow.
Yeah. And so if the artist is like, intrigued,
Right.
the songwriter gets paired up with one of three like mega successful
Oh, wow.
songwriter producers.
That's awesome.
It is awesome. And those producers are like coaches. They help to like, polish up the lyrics, punch up the arrangement, all with the goal of making this song like a potential hit for this guest artist.
Okay.
And then at the very end of the show, like, the artist chooses one song to record and release.
That's cool. So it's like a whole like developmental process.
Exactly. It is. And that's what's so brilliant about the analogy, right?
Yeah.
Because it kind of connects to this idea of reviewers as being like those developmental coaches.
Right.
And so our deep dive today is really like all about extracting the core ideas from this reviewers as coaches concept.
I like it.
What are the key takeaways? How can this mindset reshape the way we think about scholarly publishing?
Right.
But also,
Yeah.
you know what? I think it goes even beyond that.
Oh, really?
I think it might offer some valuable lessons about, feedback and growth in like all kinds of areas of our lives.
Wow, that's interesting. Okay, so let's jump right in then. What is like the first key takeaway?
Well, the first key takeaway, they actually title it, in a nod to Songland.
Oh.
They call it is the songwriter's song.
Okay, so what do they mean by that?
So they're basically making it crystal clear that the final published research paper, that's the author's creation,
Yeah.
just like that final recorded song, it belongs to the songwriter
Okay.
who had that initial spark,
Right.
And the reviewers,
Yeah.
they play a really important role in helping to like make it better. They shouldn't like overstep and impose their own, vision on the paper.
Okay.
The editorial even uses like, some strong language here.
I don't really.
They're like, they warn against reviewers becoming, like a micromanaging and domineering co-fire.
Right. It makes sense though.
Yeah.
Because you think about even when you're giving feedback on a project at work.
Right.
It's about making their work better and not making it your work.
Exactly. And it's such a crucial distinction.
Yeah.
It's about giving insightful guidance without, stifling the original voice, the unique contribution of the author.
Right.
It's like, on Songland.
Yeah.
The coaches might suggest like a different chord progression or a stronger chorus.
Right.
But they wouldn't rewrite the entire song.
Right. To fit their style.
Exactly. They're letting that heart of the original idea remain.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And the editorial, they really talk about this like this tightrope walk here.
Oh, really?
For the reviewers. Because on the one hand, reviewers need to be specific. When they pinpoint areas for improvement, they have to be specific enough that the author actually understands what the issue is.
Yeah.
It's not helpful to just say, this section is weak.
Yeah, that doesn't really help.
No, it doesn't. It's like you're on Songland.
Yeah.
A coach just saying, the lyrics aren't good.
Yeah, where do you even go from there?
Exactly right. And the editorial, they emphasize this even further. They say, the reviewer should provide enough detail that the author understands, like, the why.
Oh, the why.
The why behind the critique.
Yeah.
But then here's the other side of the tightrope walk.
Okay.
They also emphasize that the reviewer shouldn't necessarily prescribe the exact solution.
Oh, okay. So they're pointing out the problem, but not necessarily saying, like, this is how you fix it.
Exactly.
Okay.
They might, offer some potential avenues, highlight different approaches that could be taken.
Okay.
But ultimately, the author needs the space to kind of, use their own expertise and find a solution that aligns with their overall vision for the paper.
Right. And I could see how that would be helpful too.
Yeah.
Because, if the reviewer has a very specific thing in mind, it might kind of box the author in.
Right.
But giving them some agency and saying, you need to fix this, but it's up to you how to do it. I think that could be helpful.
Yeah. And it might lead to more like innovative outcomes too.
Yeah, because they might come up with something that the reviewer didn't even think of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, this is where I think it gets really interesting.
Okay.
The editorial has like a specific action item for reviewers.
Okay.
And this is, it's so simple, but it's so powerful.
What is it?
They're like, reviewers should explicitly state what they like about the paper. What is the promising core of this paper?
That's a really good point. Yeah.
Isn't that great?
Yeah. Because, so often, when you get feedback, you just get the negative stuff,
Oh, right.
But to hear like, okay, this is what you're doing well.
Yes.
This is what I like. And then, okay, here are some things that could be improved.
Yes.
I think that would make it much easier to hear.
It's so true because, it acknowledges the inherent value in the work right from the start.
Yes.
And think about it when you're giving feedback to someone
Yeah.
If you start with what's strong,
right,
the more critical points
yeah,
are so much easier to receive.
Totally. It's like you're not just tearing them down.
Right.
You're saying like, okay, I see what you're doing here. I like this.
Yeah.
But here's how to make it even better.
Exactly. And it just,
It's more encouraging.
It is encouraging. It shifts the whole dynamic of the interaction.
Right.
And it's not just about, tearing down or, highlighting all the flaws. It's about recognizing the potential.
Yeah.
Even if the current execution needs a little bit of work.
Okay.
So it reminds everyone involved that the goal is really to nurture and develop that initial spark of an idea.
Okay, I love that. So the first key takeaway is it's the author's song.
Yes.
What's the second big insight from this Songland analogy?
Okay, so the second key takeaway, it has a bit of a, compelling tension to it.
Okay.
And they titled this one, Hurt Me Be Nice.
Hurt me be nice.
Yeah. And so basically they're arguing that reviewers, they have a responsibility to be honest about the weaknesses that they identify in the paper.
Yeah.
They shouldn't sugarcoat things.
Right.
Or like lower their scholarly standards. However, the underlying motivation should always be to help the paper reach its full potential.
Okay.
And to do that, they need to adopt this developmental coaching mindset rather than just trying to, filter out submissions.
Okay, so so it's like you can be critical, but you need to be critical in a way that helps the author improve.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this really highlights a challenge, I think, in the whole peer review process.
Okay.
The editorial actually throws out this statistic.
What is it?
And it's pretty sobering. They say that in one study, over 97% of reviewer recommendations were to reject.
97% said just reject it.
Reject this paper.
That's a lot.
I know. And it really suggests that, the system might be leaning a little too heavily on the screening side of things.
Yeah. So it's more about keeping things out than about actually developing the work.
Exactly. And the editorial kind of delves into some of the reasons why this might be the case.
Okay.
time constraints for reviewers. Who are usually volunteering their expertise.
Right, they're busy people.
They are busy people. They have their own research.
Yeah.
Their own teaching.
Yeah.
And, it can feel more efficient.
Yeah.
To just like point out the flaws and say reject.
Right, because you don't have to put in the work to like actually help them develop it.
Exactly. And there's also this pressure.
Yeah.
To maintain the rigor, the reputation of academic journals.
Of course.
And that can sometimes lead to, overly critical feedback. Mm-hmm. That's kind of framed as upholding high standards.
Yeah.
It's like on Songland.
Yeah.
If a coach just said, this song isn't good enough.
Right.
But didn't offer any specific guidance.
Yeah, like how to make it better.
Right.
Yeah.
And it becomes this like, self-perpetuating cycle almost.
Oh, really?
The editorial even mentions the idea that, researchers who've experienced, harsh or unfair reviews themselves might kind of unconsciously replicate that negativity when they're in the reviewer role.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's like, it's a human response.
So, it is
not necessarily
a productive one.
A productive one.
Yeah.
And so what the editorial is really pushing for is this shift from, simply identifying problems to offering constructive criticism.
Right.
And a key part of that is being strategic about the feedback itself.
So how do you do that?
Well, they talk about prioritizing, organizing your comments effectively.
Okay.
They suggest that, a focused review, ideally around 1.5 to 2.5 pages.
Okay. Single space. Okay.
That clearly outlines the major issues.
Okay.
Offers concrete suggestions for improvement.
Okay.
Is far more valuable than like a sprawling, disorganized list of every minor nitpick.
Right. So you're not just like throwing everything at them.
You're giving them like the key things to focus on.
Exactly. Just like the top 3 things.
Yes. And think about it when you're receiving feedback on like a presentation, let's say. Would you rather have like a concise list of like the 3 main areas to improve?
Yeah.
Or like a long rambling email that points out like every single typo?
Yeah. Or like every little awkward phrasing.
Exactly. And that's what they're saying. Reviewers should really avoid.
Yeah.
It's what they call like a stream of consciousness download of thoughts.
Right.
Which can be super overwhelming.
Yeah.
And ultimately less helpful for the author.
Yeah, I get it. So basically you need to organize the feedback.
Yes.
And make it, focused on the key things.
Exactly. And so this leads to like some really good advice, I think.
Okay.
For reviewers.
Okay, what is it?
First of all, they need to actively cultivate that developmental mindset.
So seeing themselves as a coach.
Yes. Yeah. Seeing themselves as a mentor.
Yeah.
Who's guiding the author.
Yep. Okay.
Rather than just a judge.
Right. Yeah, not just like passing sentence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They should treat the author's work with the same respect that they would want for their own submission.
Right, of course.
And, while honesty is crucial,
they
should avoid prematurely labeling every perceived flaw as like fatal.
Yeah. Yeah, like give him his chance to fix it.
Exactly. Yeah. And as we've been talking about, the way that they structure and prioritize their feedback is paramount.
So the core message here is be honest, but be helpful.
Yeah.
You're aiming to elevate the work.
Right.
Not just to eliminate it.
Exactly.
Okay, and that brings us to the third key takeaway.
Right, the third key takeaway, which has this kind of like, bittersweet ring to it.
Okay.
It kind of echoes another potential Songland outcome.
Okay.
And they titled this one, Better Luck Next Time.
Oh, so this is like the rejection.
This is the rejection takeaway.
Yeah.
And it acknowledges this sometimes harsh reality that even with the most constructive feedback and the best efforts from the authors, not every submitted paper is going to end up being published in a particular journal.
Right.
It's just like on Songland. Yeah. Even if a songwriter collaborates with an amazing coach and they significantly improve their song, the guest artist still might choose a different one.
Right.
That better fits their current, artistic vision.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and the editorial points out that, journal editors, they have to make tough calls.
Yeah.
Based on a variety of factors.
Okay.
Including the overall contribution of the paper to the field, the specific scope and standards of their publication. it's not simply a matter of just tallying up the reviewer recommendations.
Right.
And sometimes a paper might have like really valuable insights.
Right.
But it's just not the right fit for that particular journal at that specific time.
Right.
But here's the important thing.
Okay.
They stress that even when a paper is ultimately rejected, the feedback provided by the reviewers still holds significant value.
Okay.
It can guide the authors in revising their work for submission to a different journal.
Right.
And it contributes to their ongoing development as researchers. So the effort that's invested in that review process, it's not wasted.
Okay.
Even if the immediate outcome isn't publication in that specific outlet.
It's like on Songland.
Exactly.
When the songwriter takes the feedback and then improves their song for the next opportunity.
Exactly. And, the editorial even mentions that many reviewers, they find a real sense of fulfillment in that mentoring aspect of the process.
Right.
Contributing to the growth of other scholars.
Right.
Even if the paper they reviewed isn't ultimately accepted by their journal.
That's really cool.
It speaks to a broader commitment, I think.
To the academic community.
Yeah.
It's not just about getting your own stuff published.
Yeah, it's about helping the field move forward.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the practical advice here for reviewers is, to provide thoughtful, constructive feedback.
Right.
Even if they don't believe the paper in its current form meets the journal standards. Because they should recognize that their comments can have a positive impact on the paper's trajectory, regardless of that initial decision.
Okay, so even a no in this case can be a helpful not yet.
Exactly.
Okay, so now that we've explored these 3 key insights from this editorial, let's bring it back around to you, the listener.
Yes.
We started off talking about how the deep dive helps you to quickly get to the core of important information.
Yes.
And so hopefully this exploration into the world of, academic peer review.
Right, through this lens of Songland has done that for you.
Hopefully.
Think about it for a second.
Yeah.
These principles that we've been discussing, about providing constructive feedback, adopting a developmental mindset, and understanding that not every attempt will be a win.
Right.
These ideas, they aren't just confined to academia, are they?
They're not.
So think about any situation where you're giving or receiving feedback, whether it's on a creative project, a professional presentation, or even, in your personal life. The way we approach these interactions can be really influenced by these concepts.
Yeah.
So it kind of raises an interesting question for you.
Yeah.
How do you typically approach giving feedback? Do you find yourself focusing more on, identifying what's wrong? Or on helping the other person to improve?
That's a good question.
And then on the flip side, how do you react when you receive feedback?
On your own work.
Yeah.
Do you see it as a personal critique? Or as an opportunity for growth?
Yeah. It's good to think about.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's just quickly revisit those 3 key takeaways.
Yeah.
Using those catchy Songland-inspired titles.
I love those titles.
Me too. So first, remember that core principle.
Yeah.
It is the songwriter's song.
Right.
Whether it's a research paper, a musical creation, or any other endeavor.
Right.
That final outcome belongs to the creator.
Yes.
And feedback should really serve as a guide, not a takeover.
Not a takeover.
Yeah. So when you're offering advice, remember, it's about helping them to realize their vision.
Their vision, not yours.
Exactly. Second, strive for that balance of hurt me, be nice.
Right.
So be honest and direct in pointing out areas for improvement.
Okay.
But always deliver that feedback.
With the intention of helping the work to become the best it can be.
Right.
And with respect for the person behind it.
It's like tough love.
Yeah.
But with a heavy emphasis on the love.
Yes.
The desire for growth.
Exactly. And then finally, embrace the reality that sometimes it's better luck next time.
Right.
Rejection isn't always a failure.
Right.
It can be a valuable learning experience that helps you to succeed later on.
Right.
So even when things don't go as planned, you can take that feedback and use it to improve for next time.
Exactly.
So the editorial's central message, the one we really wanted to drive home for you today, is to approach the role of reviewer.
Okay.
And by extension, anyone who's giving feedback as that of a developmental coach.
Developmental coach.
And so that brings us to our final thought.
Okay.
For you to ponder, how might consciously adopting this developmental coach approach, both when you're giving and receiving feedback, lead to, surprising breakthroughs and fresh perspectives in the areas that matter most to you?
Wow.
It's a subtle shift in mindset.
Yeah.
But it can have a huge impact on how we learn and how we grow.
Yeah. I think that's something worth thinking about.
Definitely.
And don't forget to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And if you're enjoying the show and want to support us in creating more insightful content, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Every contribution helps us continue this journey of exploration and discovery. Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep questioning, and keep revising and resubmitting.